Hello and welcome to iNN's Headline News and Beyond for April 2nd, 2012. And we begin off the first half of our broadcast tonight, of our report tonight, with domestic affairs as we always do, and we will have foreign affairs in the second half. Well, today it was the basically the usual suspects in the news: the U.S. primary, Trayvon Martin, uh, and the typical wrangling back and forth over uh, Republican and Democratic policies. And just to clarify our stance here, I think there needs to be a little bit of a qualification. And the qualification is not your degree or how good you are. It's simply an argument or a statement that sort of states a position, so you have an understanding of where things are coming from. Now, you've been here talking about Obama as a socialist or a social democrat, and the likes. And a lot of times you'll hear on the news, particularly in Fox News, people and on the right, people calling Obama and the other like-minded Democrats socialists. Well, the thing is that you need to understand that there is more than one type of socialist. The socialists that most people toss out are the sort of the left socialists, or social left, the social left. But there is also a social right that also exists. Both of them are socialist, but one is opposed to the other, and they are actually they're not only contradictory to each other, but they're in competition with each other. They're basically opposed to it. So you can hear someone who is anti-communist talking about Obama as a communist and saying how he supports democracy, but if you listen to certain key phrases and the things that they're and what they're saying, you'll understand the person is not talking about uh, uh, really about talking about democracy, but he's actually talking about socialism on the left. And a lot of the time, socialism on the left is socialism on the right. I should say that this is the correction here. Socialism on the right. A social right person will talk about nationalism. They'll talk about national identity. In many cases, their issue is on race and the differences between the races. What they call the human race, the different races, within humanity, not other types of races, sporting races. And so what happens? So you have communism on the left. If you go to the left side of the socialist spectrum, you have communism on your furthest most left. And then if you go to the right, you have Nazism or National Socialism, which is the furthest on the right. You will find that the National Socialists will typically be, in many cases, they'll be corporatists. They will talk about corporate values and business. They'll talk about free market enterprise and so on and so forth. But when you actually look at what they're doing and you see how they're moving towards consolidation of capital or cornering a particular market, you'll find that their arguments, as you start lifting and looking beneath them, are anything but democratic. And this, I can point this out to Fox News, because Fox always talks about they have a lot of people on who say they're constitutionalists and they want constitutionally minded judges. And if you go down and scroll down to the bottom of Fox's page, you'll see this down there. There'll be a copyright, and then the copyright claim there says this material may not be published, broadcast, rewritten, or redistributed, and that's the copyright claim. So in other words, you cannot talk about the broadcast, you cannot rewrite the broadcast. In other words, they will censor you from any attempt to criticize or knock any of their materials if you're going to use their content. We want to try to use their content against them, or as an argument to showing where they're wrong. They'll actually come out and censor you on this. And this is from a group who claimed to be Republican. They claimed to be interested in free speech. And when you see and live behind the rhetoric, are they for free speech? And you see in here, no, they're not for free speech. That they're for DCA, they're for Protect IP, they're for SOPA, and a lot of these other more Orwellian laws. Then you can now argue that these people, well, if they're not Democrats, if they're not I'm talking about proper Democrats, these are people who are properly centered, not social left, believing in a true individual American democracy, and that's what true Americanism is: a belief in individual democracy. It's the individual above the state. As soon as you move into socialist arguments, either right or left, you're talking about the state imposing or taking control over the individual, that the state has precedent over the individual. And that you're now, instead of looking towards individual justice, you're now talking in terms of social justice or the benefits for the society at large. So if you hear anyone talking about X, Y, and Z has to be done for the greater good of society, that person's a socialist. Because that is the motto for this type of society, is that you want to you want to open up and present your ideas as being beneficial for the greater good of society, and therefore the group over there, the sort of this group that you disapprove of, doesn't believe this way, and so they should be eliminated or should be pushed to the side because it's for the greater good of society. And so what happens is you have to be careful, because you do have not only socialism on the left, but you have socialism on the right. And what's happening now is we do have this sort of dynamic playing out where we have two forms of socialism coming into play in the United States. These two extreme ends are battling each other out, and if you're an independent like I am, and an independent, what you should be is the independents shouldn't be socialists on either side, but they should be people who are for individual values, and that means smaller government, lower taxes, and it's because it's up to the individual to decide what he wants to do. It's it's an individually based society. And that's where an independent is supposed to be. You're not supposed to have any alliances or allegiances to any particular group. And this, as such as myself, I have no ties and haven't joined any particular group because I am an individualist. I'm an independent. And I don't believe in belonging to any particular one group. Ironically, even my religion's like this. It's a very... my religion, although it has a church, the church is the family, the church is the house, and it's not the institution. So when I'm walking into a church, I'm not walking into an institution. I'm walking into my house. That's So that's the sort of the familiarity with it. The relationship with myself to the church is, this is my family. God is my father. I've been invited to become because I've been invited to become a son of God or a child of God. That means Christ is my brother. So this is where if you can look at a theology, and all of a sudden the theology sort of does away with that and starts looking at the God Almighty. What they've done is they've removed God the Father and are now start looking at the institutional church. And now that's where you have your ministers and all these sort of orders, these hierarchical orders, who are ministers to the King of God, the King. And the focus of the family is more or less gone. And you can see this in some of these more institutional style churches. My church isn't like this. My theology isn't like this. It's very individualistic, and So are my political views. They're very individualistic. There's no one particular allegiance to one group or another. That being said, we go back into where I'm now starting to look at some of the biases within CNN and within Fox, with all these different things. I've gotten a little more done and sort of now starting to sort of separate some of the things. And the two that I'm going to point out that I'm going to, because they are in the prime time now, that's Aaron Burnett and Anderson Cooper. They show how that even though Aaron Burnett is much better than Anderson Cooper, what happens is that her bias forms in the information that she leaves out of her broadcast. And I'll go to this today when we're going to the Trayvon Martin case. And they were talking about this new audio section that they were working on to see whose voice was that screaming on the tape for help. And Aaron Burnett simply played the section that it was from this expert who claims that he was able to decipher who it was exactly on the tape, and he said he knew for certain that this was the voice of the victim Trayvon Martin, and not George Zimmerman. And Aaron Burnett asked him how he could know this, and he says, "Well, this is the scientific, accuracy here," but he didn't go into it and elaborate how he actually knew this. When you go to Anderson Cooper, there's a much longer clip of what they're actually doing and the sort of analysis. And the clip, even though the guy reiterates and states his assertion, you see that all the work is done by software. He doesn't do any of the analysis. It's all done by software. So he's simply reporting what the computer, the research and the analysis that was done by the computer. It wasn't done by him. This expert actually has no knowledge of what actually transpired. He's simply reporting what the computer's told him. And the computer does do this when they're doing analysis. And this is true for any scientific analysis. There are always errors, but there's always a percentage of uncertainty. Now, what they were showing on the screen there is that, because they showed the screen of what he was doing, and they were showing the level of uncertainty. But again, they glossed over this. They glossed over the uncertainty and made it behave as if this guy was 100% sure this wasn't George Zimmerman. But the problem is that the way it was done, and if you know science, and if you're a scientific researcher like I am, then you have several troubling questions. One, where are your error bars? Where is your uncertainty? Because there is always some degree of uncertainty, whether it's 5%, 10%, and in some cases in science, in analysis, your uncertainty could be as high as 50%. And from some of the numbers that they were showing on there, as they were panning across the screen, I saw numbers on uncertainty close to 50%. So if this was indeed the case, that you had numbers of 50% or around that area there, even if it was down to 40%, you had 40% uncertainty. There's no way that you can say this was George Zimmerman, because the uncertainty says no. If you're at that 40 to 50% mark, then the saying that it's George Zimmerman on the tape there, or not George Zimmerman in the audio, is the analysis is as certain as it is if you had flipped a coin and it had come up the side that you wanted it to come up on. So the certainty in terms of that not being George Zimmerman on the audio for the cry for help, my suspicion is that the analysis more or less failed, because it didn't produce a conclusive result. It produced an inconclusive result, a 50-50 result in that area there. If it's between 40 and 60%, your error area there, then you basically have something that's uncertain. The only time you can claim something is somewhat certain is if you're below the 35% mark in terms of 35% error. as soon as you get to that 35% error mark, then you need to start asking yourself what went wrong with the experiment, if there anything did go wrong, or what was wrong with your measurements, because you now have a 35% uncertainty. You're getting close to that mark where you really can't say that what you see here is with any degree of certainty that it's real. And so you do need to go in and investigate. And this was never done. This was sort of left out in the open. And what's been happening, and this is sort of what I've been finding out, and sort of chasing down another source about the tapes that were sort of in the sections of the conversation, the 911 tapes that were left out, really call into question what's going on the media side of things, and whether or not the media is actually creating a story that really doesn't exist. And this sort of this was actually the intonation of Fox today on the O'Reilly factor, and he was interviewing somebody else, I guess, who was either a contributor to Fox or something. Because this is the way they usually do it. Even though they bring up independent consultants, in some way or form, these independent consultants that they're bringing up are friends of Fox or friends of the station, or CNN does the exact same thing. They're all sort of interrelated. They don't really bring up any heavy opposition to what they're saying. What they're doing is they're bringing up somebody who can more or less confirm what they're saying or reporting in the news. They don't really present the opposing view. And so what they were saying is that NBC had fabricated the story, that they left certain chunks out of it. Bill O'Reilly was trying to be more conciliatory in saying that maybe this was a mistake by a segment producer, but the person who was sort of the I guess you call it the expert that they were talking to, or the independent consultant, the independent analyst was who was on there with them. I can't remember what his name is now. Was saying that this was something had to be more deliberate, because if this was a case that was a mistake, somebody would have been fired, and there would have been a report that this was an error. So this is what they're pointing out, and this is something we've known for a while now, that CNN, Fox, all these, even Fox is guilty of this, of creating news or fixing things up. We've seen this on Anderson Cooper. We don't see this as much on Aaron Burnett. What we see in terms of the bias on Aaron Burnett is we see that, as I said, information is left out, and only certain chunks that would push people in one direction. In this case, the direction that the Trayvon Martin case is something that racially biased. This is what's reported, and the other side is more or less slowly sort of reduced, so all you have is one particular side. And what they were talking about, as they continue going on talking about this, and this is both sides of the issue here, talking about this whole Trayvon Martin thing has brought up a whole issue of race again in the United States. And Anderson Cooper wasn't on air tonight because he was out doing a study, and this was now promoted as a study on race, and they were talking to black kids about certain things about race. But here's the problem with these so-called studies, is that you're not seeing the full thing. You're not seeing all of their lab notes. You're only seeing bits and chunks of things. And knowing CNN, knowing Anderson Cooper, there's an enormous chunk out there. And then the question you have to ask yourself is that what's Anderson Cooper not showing you in these results? How did you get these results? What questions did you ask? How did you ask the questions? Who asked the questions? Because all these things matter. And when you start throwing that stuff out, you start throwing out the details and simply reporting what you view as the results are, then that's biased reporting. And you're not reporting the news, you're creating the news. And Anderson Cooper is guilty of this, not in just one area, but over and over again. He's guilty of this. So, and this is the thing, is that when you go to various different these pundits on the air, like Anderson Cooper and Bill O'Reilly and stuff like that. You really have to be careful with what you're listening to, because it can sound right, it can sound logical, but in many cases, if you don't ask yourself the full question, starting digging behind what's being said, you're not going to know the full story. You really do have to dig. You do have to look, and understanding what's going to happen in the news is not a short-term thing anymore. If you're just interested in the headlines, like a small splurb, and you're not really interested in the news, my suggestion to you is simply watch somebody like Jay Leno or David Letterman. Get your news from there, because no news channel, whether it's ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox, or whatever, no matter how deep their voices, no matter how news like they sound, they're still entertainment, and that's all you're going to get from them is entertainment. So if this is what you want, this is your excitement and entertainment, fine. If you don't want to sit in there and watch the news and really find out what's going on, and these people, really don't interest you, watch one of the comedians, because you're gonna get as much and maybe a little bit more than you would actually get on the news from the comedians. And that's sort of the state of news and journalism today, because the news and journalism has been infiltrated by PR. It also has been infiltrated by various different political intelligence groups. So if you have and this is known in the intelligence and covert groups, that the best way to start a war is to get into the news environment and make it behave as if there's a revolt going on in the society, and you can overthrow that government, you can overthrow the regime by creating broadcasts that make it look like there's a war going on in the country, when this whole war thing is really staged, and you're the one funding these so-called rebels, the freedom fighters, to revolt against the particular regime, and then that way you can certainly overthrow a regime like that. This was done and was realized. It's not something new. This is actually something old. It was done during the Vietnam War. That you had on both sides of the aisle, you had both the North Vietnamese communists, and on the right, the Americans, the American intelligence, on the streets of the United States in these different groups, pushing and trying to manipulate the situation in their favor. And so a lot of these things were not necessarily spontaneous. You had a lot of things being pushed through the universities and through these idealistic professors who call themselves idealists and and have these philosophical bents. But if you really test out these, see, here's the thing: most of these professors, the academic professors who have these views on how government should be run and should behave, really they're cowards. Because they're sitting there with a nice fat paycheck. Their paycheck is not really going to be in danger at all, and yet they're sending these kids out, the younger kids, the students out, to do the work that they're afraid to do. They won't get involved in politics. They won't, they always have some degree of an excuse why they're not president or why they're not a senator, as they are this professor. There's no reason why a professor of political science, who's supposed to be this great intellectual, isn't a senator, isn't a governor, isn't the president. I mean, there's no reason why a sitting president couldn't teach at a university as a professor. There's no reason why a vice president couldn't do the same thing. And so if they're not of this value, they're not sort of, you need to sort of start questioning them and saying, well, do they really understand what they're talking about? And then if they're talking about communism and being fair and everything like this, then why are they taking the paycheck that they're taking? Why don't they take their paycheck and start giving it out to all their students, and let them say, oh, fine, here's part of my salary. Or if things are a concept, well, paycheck is a concept, so you don't need your paycheck if you don't need if everything is a concept, right? And they're teaching about, and they're philosophizing about concepts in this existential philosophy, then why should they be paid in this concept? Because payment is a concept. And if And then so not payment is a concept either. One concept is the other. If no view matters, and you're a nihilist and you're promoting this nihilist philosophy, or you're promoting the anarchist philosophy, these are all existential philosophies, then there's no reason why these professors have to be paid. And the thing is, I guarantee you, if you start challenging these professors, who have these views, on their views, that the response is not going to be as open-minded as you think it is. Particularly, if you really start challenging their pay. If you start hitting their paycheck and start going after their paycheck, these people are not going to be as altruistic as you think they're going to be, and the response is going to be very much along the Republican lines, that they need this money, and they basically, what they are is they're elitists with a lot of money who love to hear their own voice. This is primarily what most academic these thinkers are like that, and it's not about what they have to sacrifice. It's about what you have to sacrifice, and you following what they have to say, and about their own position in your view, in their in that way their own form of society. So this is what's going on in domestic affairs. We're now going to move on to the second half in a few minutes. I will see you on the other side for the second half of iNN's Headlines and Beyond. The second half of iNN's Headlines and Beyond for April 2nd, 2012. We left off talking about Anderson Cooper's study on race. And the problem that this particular issue has is that the world has gone far beyond the issue of black and white, and this is a problem for both the Democrats and the Republicans. On the Republican side, their xenophobia has prevented them from being able to turn around and saying, look at the success of India and China. But as a success in terms of standing against Obama, because India and China are both using the Republican economic model, particularly Reagan. If they're such Reagan fans, if these people, Romney and all these PACs who are in Newt Gingrich and so on, are such Reagan fans of Ronald Reagan, then they should be putting in the economic success of India and China up on a pedestal, because this is their success story. They can easily pit India and China against what's going on in Europe, and you say, here's your choice. Democrats will give you Europe. Republicans will give you China and India in terms of the economic success. Where do you want? If this is about the economy, stupid, then they could, if they weren't so xenophobic, if India and China weren't such enemies of theirs to be feared and trotted out every time you want to see the evils of the world, oh, you got to bring up India and China. If they weren't like this, then Republicans could easily beat Obama, because all they have to do is say, if it's about the economy, stupid, you'll hold up India and China and what they're doing for economics and how they're doing economically speaking, because their economics and their economic success is based on the economy of Ronald Reagan and the Republican. And then Europe, you hold up Europe on the other side for Obama, and you say, here's Europe. What do you want? Do you want to live in a European economic situation, or do you want to live in a Indian and Chinese economic situation? There's a choice. These are the two examples of how their policies work. Obama's policies will lead us towards the economics of Europe, and the Republican economics will lead us towards the economics of India and China, assuming that they keep the economic philosophy that Ronald Reagan has, and that means open market, few regulations, and allow the free market economy to rule, rather than worrying about tariffs on this country and tariffs on that country. If you're going to go up there, as Donald Trump says, and say you're going to tax India and China, and this is part of their xenophobic behavior that the Republicans have. They're going to tax them 25% because they're doing the exact same. They're using the American economic system that Ronald Reagan put in place to produce this. You're saying, oh, this is wrong. You can't do this. Like, they're now our enemies. We got to tax them 25% because they're not being fair. I mean, they're attacking their own Republican economic policies when they do this. If you're standing up against China, if you're a Republican politician or you're a Republican political advisor or an analyst or something like that, and you're standing up, and I've seen this on CNN, I've seen it on Fox. This is where CNN and Fox sort of align with each other on China, on India, and are talking about how China and India are unfairly competitive, and and all this other stuff. Stealing jobs from Americans, and the dwindling middle class, the attack on the middle class. And both Fox and CNN, because both Democrats and Republicans have this view of anyone who is not white, and I'm talking about white being European-based, European-centric, and economically successful. If you're not white and you're economically successful, then you're cheating. If you're white and economically successful, then you're fine. And this policy is seen through all the European economies. In Canada here, the BET is not black owned. BET, the Black Entertainment Network, which is supposed to be a black owned network, has to go through the CRTC, the Canadian thought control system that controls what content gets on the air and what doesn't get on the air. The CRTC has routinely pushed these networks not to be independently owned, but owned by the government-approved networks. And all these government-approved networks that are on the Canadian channels, that run the Canadian cable system, and own all the channels on the Canadian cable system, they're all white-owned. There is not a minority in the bunch. And this is where, if you go into the whole situation, or you go into this whole xenophobic thing, where this whole concept of hate crimes, right, and hate speech is really a load of crap. Because the whole hate crimes and hate speech centers around what I talked about before, this visible minority. If you're part of this visible minority, then everything is fine for you. You can't be attacked. And people go, oh, that's a hate crime. You're a bigot. You're a racist. You can't be saying this. But if you're part of the invisible minority, right, you're an invisible minority, which meaning that they don't think you're worth their time, like Palestinians, then you can be wiped out. I mean, people can be talking about wiping off the face of the map. Face of the earth, and nobody can. If you go into any of the right-wing Israeli blogs, and you don't have to go too far to do that to see this, they're talking about eliminating the Palestinians from Palestine. Even Newt Gingrich has come up and said, well, the Palestinians aren't really, and most of the people in the Middle East, including myself, because I'm of a Greek Middle Eastern background, the Greek background I have is that my ancestral background comes from the Greeks in Cappadocia, we're Asian-minded Middle Eastern Greeks, so we have that culture there. That we're not real, that we're figments of somebody's imagination, and that we're all really Arabs. Well, I can tell you from my history, my family background, that we're not Arabs. We are our own independent cultures. We're not Muslims. We're Christians. And we are the Christians, if you look at the history books, and I'm not going to really go into history, the real history books, not the ones I show you in school, but if you go into the libraries and do your research properly, you'll see that we were the Eastern Christians, the Christians that had preceded the Western Christians by 1,000 years. The first 1,000 years of Christianity was Eastern Christianity. Around 1000 AD, up came Western Christianity. And Newt Gingrich, who was talking about, this whole, the Arab-centric view of the Middle East, that everyone's a Bedouin and everyone's sort of migrate. There is no real Palestinian. There's no, everybody there are all Arabs. Is from this Eurocentric, this white-centered Nazi view that the the civilizations of the world in the Middle East, in that area like that, must have been all European centered, because only white Europeans are intelligent enough. And what happens is that this propaganda sort of filters out and through all these things and through the media, and this is where Fox has its problems and the Republicans have its problems. Because if this is the view of your average Republican, then they have enormous problems, because they can't stand up and say that a Chinese person who uses the Republican view, the Reagan view of economics and policy, got his economic wealth in the exact same way that J.D. Rockefeller did, or J.P. Morgan, that he is a self-made person, and this is sort of the ideal of Reagan Republic, sort of trying to push the American ideal to its largest extent, that everybody in the free market economy could have a piece of the pie, because you could make your own pie if you wanted to. It wasn't just one pie that we had. You can make as many pies as you want. But the thing is, even when you listen to the social left, the socialists on the left, like Obama, this same racial rhetoric pops up again, because they're talking about, and I've seen this with Reverend Al Sharpton, talking about the things you can and cannot say on the air about black people. Like you can't use for them, you can't use the word nigger. Well, if you go into the dictionary and you do do a research on the history of the word, you go into the etymology of the word, you'll find that the Negro, nigger, which is a incorrect pronunciation of the term Negro, goes all the way back to the Greek, meaning dark. And you see it in South America. You'll see rivers named Rio Negro, right? The dark river. Well, my last name is Cara, it's actually Kara. My grandfather's name was Karathanasis, and that means dark. So Cara and Negro are the same word. So am I now banned from saying my own last name? Is my last name a racial term that cannot be said because he is of a particular race that is considered to be a visible minority, and I'm an invisible minority, so his rights supersede mine? And so this is what I say. You gotta be careful when people when people talk about freedoms and they're out there for civil rights movement and stuff like that. That what you'll have is, if you start picking up the covers and looking beneath, you'll start seeing that there's a lot of stuff they're not talking about freedom. They're talking about restrictions of freedom. They're talking about flagging people for saying certain things, whether it's either something that a leftist doesn't like in terms of being racial and about something negative about some of these visible minorities, or somebody on the right who doesn't want somebody on the left saying something about their particular views that they find offensive. And so you have this back and forth between the social left and the social right as to how things should actually be working out. And this is no exception when it comes down to the policy and foreign dealing with other countries and foreign policy. And this dynamic, this blind racist philosophy. And the thing is, if you come to Toronto, and Anderson Cooper should know this because one of his shows is based in Toronto. If he took a moment just to look around Toronto and see how international Toronto is, because it's not that it's suave international, or in terms of its stature, is that people who came from different countries never felt the need to change their origins. In the United States, you have to be American first. Here in Toronto, you're whatever you are, whatever you came as, and then you're Canadian afterwards. So they haven't westernized here in Toronto. And as you go around to community, what you'll hear over and over and over again, and this is actually reflected in the old sitcom of Archie Bunker, Archie Bunker's I forgot the show. It gets on the tip of my tongue. Um, the show with Archie Bunker in it, and you'll find this view of race and people staying within their own racial boundaries, not only on the white side, but from every ethnic background. You'll see this, including the blacks. One of the key players in Archie Bunker, which produced the show The Jeffersons, was George Jefferson. And George Jefferson was as racist and sort of racially separated, keeping whites and blacks apart, as Archie Bunker was. And the thing is, when you go talk to some of the Chinese, and you talk to some of the Indians here, and you talk to some of the Greeks, you talk to even some of the Italians, they'll tell you, stay away from group X, Y, and Z. And then they're talking primarily about the European groups, the European white groups, and this includes the blacks who, ironically, a lot of the people like Al Sharpton don't realize that, and this includes Obama and Oprah, that they're classified by most of the immigrant community as white. Anything that is Western and European leaning is considered to be white. This includes Obama, this includes Oprah, because they're westernized. If you're not westernized, if you're have that more of the village mentality, you're more of an Eastern type of person, then you're not Europeanized, you're not European, and therefore you're not white. And they'll tell you, stay away from white people. And every girl has told us, stay away from a white person. And they're talking about black and white here. They're not talking. There's no color differentiation in there. As long as you're Western, white, European, stay away from them. So it's throughout all the communities are like this. All the immigrant communities here are like this. And the thing is that when you go into Syria and you hear now that the United States is starting to support this policy that where they're now admitting that they're helping the Syrian rebels, and the UK announced the same thing, and they say, well, this is for humanitarian reasons. They're there to help out, to free the Syrians, right? Because this Syrian rebel now, these Syrian rebels are supposedly on the visible minority list that these gracious white people are going to help out. But at the same breath, when you go into the Israeli media and look at people like David, Rabbi David Weiss, he's one of these is an Israeli rabbi, and he's joined by other rabbis and various different Israeli peace groups who focus on the injustices and the horrors being done to the Palestinians. And even the Israeli right, the Israeli right in the media, come out and say that they, and this is sort of confirmed with Newt Gingrich's view, that there are no Palestinians, that these people are all sort of invaders from other areas, and that Israel has a right to this land because these people really aren't Palestinians. They're all Arabs there. And when this argument is made, what you're hearing is from Israel, from the Israeli right, that they intend to wipe out and push out all of the Palestinians in there. That means that they're going to ethnically cleanse the entire area. So in one breath, the Republican right and some of the left there, the media, in both sides of the media, because we see this in Andrew Cooper, are standing up and saying, we're going to help the Syrian people, but they're not really going to help the Syrian people. They're going to help the rebels fight the army and create a war inside of Syria, which will kill more people than it would have if they sort of left it alone. But they're going to kill all these people in the name of peace and humanitarian aid and humanitarianism to promote a sort of this visible minority, sort of, because they also don't want to promote the visible minority of the Palestinians, who they want to keep as invisible so they can be wiped out and pushed out of the Middle East, because these people don't believe that the Palestinians should be there in the first place. And there's no problem if you wipe out and move these people out. And so this is the hypocrisy, and this is the sort of, you can sort of see now the racial divide behind a lot of American foreign policy. The racial views that you see in the United States and the xenophobic views that you see in the United States carries out and carries through there into its foreign policy. And this even occurs when you have Obama as president, who is primarily a white, Western thinking person. He's white. Obama is not black because his skin color is black. Obama is white because his thinking is Western, is Europeanized, and that everybody who wants to be around him, or should be, he thinks that the people should be around him and be grateful to him, should have the same thinking he does. And this is the overall arching view of the UN, who has granted these I could call them token gestures of foreignism, where they have Kofi Annan, they have Ban Ki-moon, all parroting the same Western European ideology within the UN. And you start looking around and seeing what they've done, and you see that as they're talking about the peace plan here in Syria, and they're saying, that we are going to do all these different things to help peace, and we're going to cause a war in there, but they're still talking about doing a covert war with Iran. They're still talking about pushing the war into Iran further. They now set a deadline for June. If you do a lot of the background research, there is now a sort of floating deadline around there of June to start the war in Iran. Now, we'll see if that's going to be halted. We'll see in June whether or not we're in a war with Iran or not. If we're not in a war with Iran, something has happened, and we've sort of ended up in a place where it's not intended. But this was a argument presented by John Bolton, the UN, one of our ambassadors to the UN, stated that what Obama and Panetta are doing right now are openly sabotaging Israel's attack on Iran. Apparently, Israel has made an arrangement with Azerbaijan to use military bases there to attack the Iranian, where they suspect the Iranian nuclear facilities are in the north, near the Caspian Sea. This would make sense because you need water. Any nuclear plant needs a large body of water to be near. So the best place to put this would be around the Caspian Sea, around that area there, where they have a large, a large supply of water. And the thing is that his account was that there was this plan, and there's this plan to attack Israel by June. The best window would be between basically now and June. But that's been thwarted by Leon, that they weren't able to get the agreement with Israel to stop the war, and so this seems to be an end round sort of a leaking of sensitive intelligence reports. I think most intelligence reports are leaked anyways. If you dig deep enough, you can find most of the covert materials of WikiLeaks out there on the internet. Most covert information is not a secret. It's out there someplace. You just need to sort of piece things together. And so right now, we're back in, even though it's not in the headlines, we're now back in a position where we're watching for war with Iran. And that we know now that Syria, since this is still a confirmation, this is still going on, this is confirmation that both Israel and the United States and France and the Western European allies have all been in Syria, pushing this war in Syria, pushing this rebellion in Syria, so that they can destabilize Syria enough so they can push through Syria into Iran. And there's no mistake that this whole thing with Syria is going on, because Syria has long been an ally with Iran. And the thing is, there's also concern now that this is going to push things further, because you've had the attempted coup inside of China, you had the Russian election. You still have issues with the Russian election, and both China and Russia are traditional allies of Syria and Iran. And so you can see a dynamic at play here, and this is, you said you should go watch Daniel Jurgens the prize. I will be uploading the 4th episode this week. Right now we're still on the 3rd episode, but I will be uploading the 4th episode sometime either tomorrow or on Wednesday, and you can take a look at that and to see how these dynamics play out. And you can see that we can see how things are going to go in Syria by looking at the successes in other areas. And where are we talking about the areas? Well, in Pakistan, right? The Pakistan started much earlier with the removal of Musharraf. This whole thing of bringing Israeli democracy to the Middle East and in Islamic countries. And what do we see in Pakistan? We're still having an attack there was still a bombing last week in Pakistan, in Karachi, that killed a lot of people. They're still having bombings in Pakistan. And again, this is aimed at the government by jihadists in order to bring in a more radicalized Muslim state, because Pakistan is already a Muslim state, but these groups want it to be more Muslim. It's not enough for them to be simply Muslim. They want to be ultra Muslim. They want to be, jihad. They want to be the extremists. And the thing is, we're seeing this now. The Taliban has just announced that it's going to start attacking, and has started attacking, the Afghan security forces. As the United States starts to pull out of Afghanistan, the security forces are going to come into more and more fire. There's going to be more and more pressure put on the Afghan forces. And how are they doing this? They're dressing up as Afghan soldiers, and Afghan security forces, and Afghan police, and they're attacking from the inside. And so when we go back and you take a look at these videos of these reported attacks on civilians by Assad's men in Syria, and you see the attacks done by the jihadists in Afghanistan in full Afghan police uniform, you need to ask yourself the question when you're watching these videos: is the footage that you're seeing, because the rebels are heavily armed with all the munitions that the rebels have, can do the damage that you're seeing in the videos? So the people in the videos who are in the security forces uniform, are they actually Assad's men, or are they jihadists dressed up as Assad's men? This cannot be confirmed, even though after Anderson Cooper does all the type of what's going on in Syria and all the atrocities going on in Syria, shows these videos, and these are the only videos that you see, videos that cannot be confirmed because of what Al-Qaeda does and the way Al-Qaeda behaves. So you don't know who's actually doing the killing. Saying, "Oh, we can't confirm this," but they think up to the point, we can't confirm these videos or the source of these videos. That's the last little thing, and it's understated. The hype up to it, the hype about the atrocities is the first thing you see. So they're bringing you up. They're telling you that this is something that Assad's men are doing, but they, "Oh, by the way, we can't necessarily confirm. This might not be true." After they're done all this, and they only do this on Anderson Cooper to have this at the end. But all of the teasers, all of the lead up to the Anderson Cooper show, where they show breaking news and stuff like that, they never ever at the present this as that this might be possibly a rigged video, or that they know where the source came from. And we see in the NBC, and we see that even Fox has accused NBC and a lot of other places, and other news agencies have accused other news agencies of doing this, of rigging and staging video and staging events. So the question is that whether are the events coming through these reporters that we're seeing in Syria, are they staged events? We don't know this because, and you can't say that they aren't staged events, because we know this is the history. This is well within the history of American media. This is well in the history of the BBC now. BBC has started doing this. Same thing with Al Jazeera has started doing this. They've been caught at this. Even the New York Times has been caught fabricating stories. And so, where else do we see problems? We still see problems in Yemen. Yemen is at the point of another military conflict. It's having problems with Al-Qaeda in there. The Al-Qaeda problems are going on in Mali. They're in Somalia. They're in Egypt, where the Muslim Brotherhood, who are on the verge of winning and taking power, are now saying they may not want to take over, but they're now starting to fight amongst each other. So you may have a split up there. And I think so. Even now in Nigeria, all over Africa, you're having the same dynamic going on. And in Africa, you have the Western powers stepping in and sort of meddling and interfering in this area. Matter of fact, the United States and the UN is in almost every single conflict around the world. And so you need to ask yourself the question, well, if we're in all these particular areas meddling and putting our 2 cents in, what's going to be the consequence of this? And so I'll leave you with that thought for tonight. And tomorrow night, I'll have more sources for you and more information on what's going on in the world. All right, take it easy.
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.